Hello, English 1. Okay. Hello, class. Welcome back to my channel. I hope this video finds you well, and I hope you've all been washing your hands. One of you suggested that we go back to having our daily questions, our questions of the day, and I think that's a great idea. So why don't you tell me in the comments below what your hobbies have been now that you're homebound? I have been baking bread and reading more than I usually get to do, and learning how to edit videos. Let me know what y'all are up to. I hope it's riveting. I hope it's exciting. I hope it's socially distant. Today we're going to be talking about emotional eating. By now, you should have read Emotional Eating, written a journal, identifying what in emotional eating stands out to you as a literature review based on your understanding of it now, or, you know, all of those helpful little tips and tricks in the footnotes where she gives you all of the answers. So if you haven't done that yet, pause this video and do that now. And I am going to give you an overview of what I think the most useful parts of this essay are, and some places where I think it could be better. Abby Hurd's essay is the most technically perfect literature review that I have ever read. The introduction introduces her research, describes why it's important, and ends with a thesis that explains what draws all of her research together and what common threads exist between them without taking too far of a stance on her own. It's not what Abby Hurd thinks about eating and emotions. It's what these scholars that Abby Hurd has found and their research that she's read, what they say about emotional eating. She divides her research by topics, and you can see those really clearly in the headings that she uses. So I have mine here. We have the introduction on page 122, the influence of mood on eating behavior, gender differences, all that stuff. So those are the headings that she uses to show how she's dividing by category and not just by source. So unlike the annotated bibliography, she's not just going source by source by source. She is bringing them all together and identifying what they share, what they have in common, and you know, what they can add to each other. And that's how she's organizing her essay. In her conclusion, Abby Hurd reiterates why her research is important, identifies something that's called a gap in the research. So that means that she found a place where research should be done and it hasn't been. And then she concludes with a suggestion of where we could go next. So she points out that there's been a lot more research done on women than there has been on men in regards to emotional eating. And then she suggests further steps. So she says that the next step should be to research the effectiveness of alternative coping mechanisms for stress. So she reiterates what she said, and then she identifies that gap in the research. She identifies somewhere where research has been done and it hasn't been yet, and then she suggests further steps. This is exactly what you want to do when you're concluding a literature review. She ends with a reference page or a works cited page. Everything's in APA format and it's in alphabetical order. So again, Hurd's essay is technically flawless. It's exactly what a literature review needs to be doing. It has the right tone of voice, its paragraphs are doing the correct jobs. It's a little dry, it's a little boring, and it's a little impersonal. Some literature reviews do need to be that way. They need to be very removed and scientific. Yours don't need to be quite this boring. Shouldn't say that, should I? Yours don't need to be quite so cut and dry. We're going to read another essay next. It's not really a literature review. It's called Beautiful Brains by David Dobbs. And that is a really great example of how to bring in a personal connection. a personal anecdote, a story from your life that illustrates why this topic is important to you instead of just explaining that it's important. And emotional eating leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of introducing your scholars. She does a lot of further research shows, or one study finds, or some scholars suggest. Um, and for some purposes, that's fine. For ours, that's a little bit more vague than I'd like you to be. Um, so when you guys are writing your own papers, I'd really like for you to say a study conducted by, and then put the author's name in, or research from, this institute. It's a way of directing you to be focusing more on where your sources come from. That helps you keep your work centered around the purpose of a literature review, which is all about the research and not breaking it down to a point where the reader wouldn't be sure um, what is your work and what is the work of these scholars and these other institutes that have conducted the research. You want to be really clear that you are summarizing the work of others. And one way to do that is to be really specific about whose work it is that you're looking at. And it's always good practice to double check your research. I know that when you were doing your annotated bibliographies, we talked a lot about peer review and how peer review is a process that checks your work and makes sure that it's trustworthy, make sure that it's reputable. And researching your sources when you're writing about them just takes that one step further. As you move forward as researchers and you continue in your college careers doing research that's in your specialized fields, you might want to start to think about how things like country or region that your research comes from affects the way that they talk about their findings. Or when you specialize in a field, you might start to recognize certain sorts of publishers or journals, and you may have an idea in your head of what sort of papers they're more or less likely to publish, or what kind of bias that publisher has. Or you may look into the authors themselves. They might have some sort of biographical detail that puts a spin on the way that they're interpreting their research. Everything and everyone has a bias that doesn't go away, and there's no way to write an unbiased paper. I'm full of bias, you're full of bias. It's part of being a human being. And it doesn't disqualify research at all. It just means that you want to be aware of what that is when you're taking these people and you're trusting their words. Being aware of where your research comes from just helps you grow to be a more effective researcher at the end of the day. So that is why I like for you guys to be very thorough when you're introducing your authors. And we're going to talk more about what this specifically looks like as time goes on, especially a little bit down the road when we talk about introducing quotes and unpacking them in a way that's a little bit more fun than what we did for our annotated bibliographies. You don't just have to summarize and repeat what they said. Now you get to kind of learn to put your own spin on it, and the way to do that is in the way that you introduce and unpack them. So we're going to talk more about that in a bit. Your homework for Monday is to read Beautiful Brains. It's another researched essay by David Dobbs. It's not exactly a literature review. So in your journal for your homework, I want you to identify some aspects that are like what Abby Hurd is doing and what we've described as a literature review, and some other things that are not so similar, some things that seem to stray from what we know a literature review is supposed to do. And then when you're responding to your peers, it will be after we've talked a little bit about how we can find a healthy... I just spilled tea all over myself. Our video on Monday will be about how to find a healthy balance between meeting the genre requirements of a literature review while simultaneously getting some more interesting stuff in there. How to balance your assignment requirements with stylistic choices. Then when you're responding to your peers, you can start to make decisions about which path you think you're going to take. Like, where do you think you want to add a little bit more of a personal spin? Where do you think you should probably just stick to what we say a literature review is? Start to make decisions and plan for your rough draft. And talk to your peers about it. Be in conversation. Have a good time. So remember to comment below what your quarantine hobbies have been. And as always, if anything is unclear, if you have questions, if you have suggestions, a way that we can better facilitate these classes that doesn't involve the Wi-Fi disaster, that would be a 23-person video chat, let me know in the comments, in my email, send me a text. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope this video is better than the last one. Yes, I do. See you guys soon.